2 years since its historic vote for equal marriage, how has the country changed for its LGBTQ population? Has the increased visibility brought about through the referendum made a difference, or do old prejudices still prevail? Throughout this series, we'll highlight the breadth and colour of our community, our successes and supports, our talents and trailblazers, and discuss what it's like to be LGBTQ in Ireland.
Okay, my name is Turin Glavin. I am the Administrative Officer for Transgender Equality Network Ireland, more commonly known as TENI. So TENI is a community organisation for the transgender community here in Ireland and their family. It has kind of three main pillars that it works on, so the support, education and advocacy. So the support kind of side of things, we support the support groups around the country so that they can provide a more localised support system to trans people. We also have a family support and education officer. She's the busiest person in the organisation. Families love to get in touch, and it's her job to make sure that families are supported, whether that's bringing their child through education or bringing their child to the GP. It's making sure that those families feel supported and are confident in their child or young adults transition. With regard to advocacy, we were instrumental in ensuring that the Gender Recognition Act introduced in 2015 came into place. And we do a lot around anything with legislation and trans people. And then finally with education, we do work to educate workplaces, healthcare providers, GPs, and actually institutes of education themselves on what it is to be a trans person and how best to facilitate them within these kind of areas.
And with the fight to get the Gender Recognition Act passed, could you tell us a little bit about its evolution?
Yeah, so I'm only 22 myself, so I wasn't around for a lot of it. It was quite a long battle, and they did go on for a very long time. Eventually, thanks to Lydia Foy and her cases against the Irish government were told they needed to introduce this legislation, which kind of put a push on them. Now, the initial legislation they introduced or planned on introducing wasn't very good. It involved requiring medical practitioners to diagnose you as being trans, and it required, if you were married, you had to get divorced because it was seen as a backdoor way into same-sex marriage. So if a man suddenly decided to transition to a woman, was already married to a woman, it would create same-sex marriage, which obviously wasn't legal at the time. And it also didn't have any catering for under 18s. So it wasn't great. Now, thankfully, the piece of legislation that was eventually introduced in 2015 is one of the most progressive pieces of gender recognition legislation in the world. It was one of only 3 or 4 countries at the time, which allowed the trans person to self-declare their gender identity. So I fill in a form, I send it to the government, I go, I'm a woman now, and they go, yes you are, here's your certificate, tell everyone. But that is actually very unusual. Around the world, you usually do require medical practitioners and psychiatrists and everyone to evaluate you and diagnose you, which is very clinical and not very much what the trans community likes. So it's a hugely progressive piece of legislation, but there's still a lot to do. Like, there's no cover for non-binary people. You either transition from male to female or female to male. You don't do anything in the middle, which is kind of an issue. And also for those under 16, there's currently no cover in this legislation. So while it's fantastic and we do love it, there's still a bit that needs to be done.
What would be kind of some of the difficulties that transgender people would face in society?
I think one of the biggest issues we face, and something that's changing, is just a lack of understanding. I think the Irish people are hugely positive and are hugely welcoming, and once they understand trans issues and once they understand where trans people are coming from, they want to accept that and they want to show love and support. But really, we've had it as such a taboo topic for so long, we haven't talked about trans issues for so long, that it's kind of been hard to get to a place where people will talk about it openly. But as we're getting there, people are finding it much easier to enter the workforce and enter education and to get healthcare as we kind of talk about these issues. I suppose the main kind of issue are the ones we always talk about, like healthcare. The system can be quite ad hoc and it can be quite difficult to transverse as a trans person and very uncertain. In the workplace too, lots of workplaces don't know what to do with someone who's transitioning, and they don't always act in the most appropriate way, and that's simply lack of knowledge. So it's these kind of stereotypical issues that come up with a kind of lack of knowledge around the topic. So I really think knowledge and teaching people and bringing people with you and bringing people with the trans community is the way you kind of change those things.
Do you think like depictions in popular culture kind of help or hinder?
I think they do both. I think they have helped hugely, but I think there can be problems. I think you very much get the idea that the entire trans community is over-sexualized trans women who will do anything to get on top, and I don't think that's true. In fact, trans women are a very, very small part of the community. It's much more trans men and non-binary people we actually see. But I think it helps, like the amount of people that I've spoken to over the last few years who've said, oh, seeing Caitlyn Jenner come out made me come out. Oh, I saw Laverne Cox in Orange Is the New Black and I realised there were trans people. I still think we have a way to go with seeing a more kind of representative trans kind of media. Like at the minute it is just trans women. We really see, like even in Sense8, you have the character of Nomi, who's played by trans woman Jamie Clayton, and that's directed and produced and written by trans women. But you don't have that same representation for trans men and non-binary people. So when someone like Caitlyn Jenner, one of the best known people in the world, an Olympic athlete, comes out, it makes the world pay attention. And at that point, the trans community can kind of seize the media attention and bring it back and actually tell the real life stories.
So with the passing of the Gender Recognition Act in Ireland was a positive step forward. In other countries like America, things are kind of getting a little bit scary with things like the bathroom bill and stuff like that. What would be any comments you have on that?
It really does highlight how accepting the Irish people are. We're seen, for whatever reason, on the international stage as being a backward, strange little Catholic country, but I don't think that's true. As a trans person, my experiences are far more positive than trans people in the UK and the US, and I think bathroom bills, such as the one that are coming up in the US, I think a lot of the reason there are problems for the trans community in the US is because the Supreme Court has ruled marriage equality has to happen. Unfortunately, those fundamentalists on the right have decided that trans people are the next open topic, which is unfortunate. But I think common sense and decency always kind of prevails in those situations, and I think we'll have this for a few years and things will be bizarre and strange, and we'll have silly stories of people in the US doing silly things to trans people, but I do think common decency prevails, and I would hope so. But if there's a positive to be taken out of it, it's definitely, it does highlight just how great it is to be trans and Irish, which is always nice. Our little island gets some beating sometimes.
And if people want to help or get some more information, how would they go about contacting you?
Teni.ie, so www.teni.ie. There's lots of information there from GPs, counsellors, psychologists, support groups, and we have memberships, so please join. We're very much a community organisation. That's where we come from. We wouldn't be anything without the community, and we couldn't function without the community. We need the trans community to really drive what we do, and we need our membership to drive what we do. And
where does Tonie go from here? What's the next step?
All of these changes we made and all the progress we've made and all of these people who are coming out now are supported. Like, I first came out 5 years ago when I was 17, and at the time you very rarely met any trans people, and I was out for 2 years before I met any trans people. Now there are trans people everywhere, and it's multiplying, it's multiplying, and it's multiplying. And our future is just supporting those people and making sure that they always have a voice and they always have representation and they always have someone fighting for them. So that's very much the future of Tonie, I think.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much for your time.
Adam Shanley. I'm Director of Gay Switchboard Ireland. Gay Switchboard Ireland is a service for LGBT people, their family and their friends. It's predominantly a listening service, and we offer support and signposting for the community.
Now, could you tell us a little bit about the history, like why and when it was formed?
Sure. Gay Switchboard was formed in 1974. Last year was actually our 40th anniversary. And at the time it was actually called Tell a Friend, because the word gay wasn't actually allowed to be used in the telephone book, if you can imagine that. So it was called Tell a Friend, but it's now known as Gay Switchboard Ireland, and it kind of came out of there being a lack of support during a time, you know, homosexuality was still a criminal act. So there was no real kind of support system there for anybody that identified as gay, lesbian, bisexual or transgender. So it was kind of like a community grassroots thing that kind of sprouted, you know.
And how has it evolved? Like, have you noticed as times have gone by, because of, you know, changing attitudes in society, the questions or the problems people would have evolved with it?
Initially, when it was founded, it probably was just, it was to have some type of a contact with other lesbian or gay people, because I suppose you wouldn't have a circle of friends, or maybe you wouldn't have an extensive circle of friends that you could reach out to and talk to and meet. And I suppose over the years it has evolved to, some of the topics that would always remain would be things like coming out, sexual health. But obviously in the last couple of years with initially civil partnership and now thankfully marriage equality, all of the issues that surrounded that as well have kind of come up in recent times. And things to do with, younger people are now kind of coming out at a younger age as well. So, people looking for support in that way, we'd partner with Belong To, a great organisation for young people. So, it kind of, there's been a mix of different things. There's things that will always stay. I think issues around coming out and sexual health, they're not going anywhere. But I suppose as things develop in society, they kind of crop up as they come,
Does it seem like homophobia is still common?
It's still common. I don't think it's as prevalent as it may have once been. I think society has definitely come a very long way in such a short period of time. I don't think it will ever really disappear. People will always hold prejudices regardless of if it's towards sexuality or race or any other minority. I think it will always be around, but I definitely think in the last 10 years or even in the last maybe 5 years, it has diminished a lot because I suppose our LGBT visibility is heightened somewhat. And that's, down to some, down to civil partnership and most recently the referendum, marriage equality, but also, more kind of well-known people kind of in society kind of coming out, and, recently ministers coming out and sports personalities and stuff like that. And I think that all kind of helps to break down people's idea of it being otherness.
And with the issue of coming out, do you get calls from young people, or is it, do you still get older people ringing you? Yeah,
I mean, coming out isn't, I suppose when we think about coming out, you might kind of think that it's someone in their teens or early 20s, but it's across the spectrum of age. We would get calls from men and women in their mid-30s, 40s, 50s that, have maybe kind of suppressed their sexuality for quite a while, and maybe over the last little while, as it's becoming a little bit more socially accepted, that it's kind of awoken in them again, and they're kind of thinking, God, I can't believe I'm X years old and this is only kind of coming to the fore now. So yeah, it's a complete mix of ages and backgrounds of people that come out, Predominant calls that we would get would be what we call rural and isolation calls. So people down in down the country in different towns and villages across the country that would ring up, and a lot of time they feel detached from the community. They don't have a network of friends, and sometimes they just want to talk, and that's absolutely what we're there for too, But it can be quite frustrating when for both parties, when you're on the phone call and you're empathizing and you're talking about their day, but for us at that point, that's all that we could do. So we were we tried to put our heads together and think, like, is there anything more we could do? So we applied for the Dublin Bus Community Spirit Initiative to look at working in those communities themselves. So having, let's say we take a Saturday, we go to Tralee or Athlone, Mullingar, Galway, somewhere in Galway, and we would get together as many of people in the locality as we can, maybe during the day, have workshops on the different kind of areas that that we have expertise in, and then in the evening have a social gathering. So if that's going for a couple of pints, going for dinner, maybe bowling or whatever. But I suppose with the ideology of trying to get these people together so that they do have support, and that they can, they can gather up together and maybe make this a thing that they do every 2 weeks or every month themselves. So it kind of diminishes that lack of inclusion and feeling isolated. So we're really excited to be picking up that award this evening and the grant that goes with that.
And just in closing, it must feel great to see, what exactly you can do for these people, with the one-on-one thing that, as you said, it's difficult on the phone, but if you can see them.
One of the things that our volunteers would consistently say is that, even sometimes you'll go and you'll take a shift and you'll be there for 2.5 hours and the phone doesn't ring. But sometimes the phone will ring and the conversation that you have, will it might turn that person's life around. It might offer that person a different perspective that they hadn't seen. And that, to be able to walk away from that is with that kind of knowledge that you've in some way, helped a person out, is massively rewarding. And I know that's why our volunteers will they'll stay with us and they'll keep with us, because it's hugely rewarding work. Yeah.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much for that.
My name is Tracy Martin, and I'm the Artistic Director of Red Bear Productions. I had been working freelance as a producer in estate companies. I started my own company because I wanted to keep making work. So the first piece I did was Philly McMahon's Danny and Chantel, and I put it downstairs in the dance floor in the nightclub, the Globe, and then did some more pieces after that. Just kept working and finding actors, and after that it was my own scripts. So.
And has it mostly evolved into now writing and directing your own work?
At the moment I'm enjoying it, but I'm sure if I was to continue that I would like to get somebody else's eyes and ears in, and just to see what they can do.
And you had a great success with Wrapped.
Yeah, Wrapped was fab.
How did that feel?
That was great, you know. It was great because I loved working with the girls, and it was my first time, kind of having people kind of have a buzz about something that I'd done, which is really interesting. And we've been putting it on since, and that was great to get nominated. That was great.
And tell us about the new one now.
It's called Harder, Faster, More, and it's opening in half an hour. And it's basically 3 actresses: Aoibhinn McCann, who's also my producer, Charlene Gleeson, and Claire Monelly. And it's 7 intertwined phone conversations, and it's all based around sex and sexual politics and the sexualization of women. So there's a mixture of comedy and terror, mainly coming from me. But so that's open tonight, so we'll see tomorrow how it went.
And just speaking of sexuality and things like that, do you feel like your sexuality has had a deliberate influence on your work?
No, I think when I started making work that was more kind of nightclub and cabaret based, yes, I think it definitely has. I think being queer, being a feminist, being a woman makes me write a certain way. I think, being everything influences everything, coming from a certain area, having certain parents, whatever, it all influences it. But the idea, especially being a gay woman, a queer, I really love the idea of making work that possibly rattles cages. And
do you feel like with gay artists that they're expected to address the issue?
I don't feel any expectation on myself to address any issue. I would only try and make stuff that possibly hasn't been expressed. I'm more interested in good storytelling, and so if all these different influences in my life and my politics makes those stories a certain way, then I don't know, we'll find out in 20 years after I look back and work and go, oh.
Because you kind of, you would have come up in a very creative culture with cabaret and the Pony Girls and things like that. Do you feel like it was a more protective atmosphere for somebody to kind of
I certainly feel, if you work in a creative community, if you work especially in theatre, we don't have the same problems as, say, possibly a teacher or somebody on a building site or in different, you know, it doesn't get more gay than theatre, and especially Dublin theatre, you know, so I've never felt it being an issue at all, but I've never not been out.
And do you think it's too soon after the referendum to notice if artists are reacting to
I think a lot of artists reacted to it as it was happening. I think there's a bit of referendum fatigue at the moment, and it's a funny one because it's, you know, possibly by asking for normalisation, it's not the most interesting thing to then make work about, you know. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see if any work comes out of it.
And speaking of work, what's in the future for Red Bear?
I'd love to just keep bringing the work to audiences, that it doesn't just stop at Fringe and that we can bring it to more venues. I would love to try and get something on in London. And yeah, I've got 2 ideas of the next 2 plays, so we'll see if that happens or not.
Very exciting. So thanks very much, Tracy.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant, and good luck with the opening night.
Thanks.